I'd like to ask if this particular news, the news of this particular probe, if it rekindles any hope in you. Is this the sanity and probity that we want to return to the public sector?
Well, it's a probe, so it's better than doing nothing. But I'm being cynical here. I think it's a probe more or less to explain that the 30 trillion is made up of the borrowings from the past administration, because the current administration has borrowed about 7 trillion and has added to that debt. So I think it's the way to say, listen, this was made up of the past debt of 23 trillion, and we have added about 7 currently. That's what I think is going on. But I like it that they are looking back to ask what happened to all that money. If you convert that to dollars, about $50 billion that was maybe given to the government by the CBN through Ways and Means. So we must ask that question: where did the money go to? What was it used for? Yeah.
Okay, so you're not talking about, having any sort of confidence that this will probably lead us somewhere.
I think if we do it properly, I don't trust the same Senate that approved illegality to prove themselves. It should be a third party that would probe the Senate. Because the Senate approved the issuance of bonds, i.e. they cleared that borrowing in the past administration. And most of the guys in the Senate are still there today that passed debt. So I would prefer a third party probes what happened, not the Senate that approved the loan, probing what the loan itself was used for. So I would prefer someone like a special counsel. Maybe Nigeria has that sort of provision, but an independent person that would go in and say, who approved this? Where did they go to? Why did the Senate approve this, even though you knew it was illegal? That would make more sense in my view.
All right, but the Senate, even before now, the last Senate was asking for, the former administration to also show how this particular amount was used, and we do not have that now. And for the Senate, what it probably did was just to, approve the, what's the word now? That's the securitization of this particular loan. And according to them, they were left with no other option. They just had to do it because, something has to give or something.
Yes, but you see, this happened over 2015, 2016, 17. The CBN law says 5% of past year's revenues, and that if they don't pay back, you don't give them new loans. The last time the federal government paid back the CBN was 2017. So at that point, when the federal government was borrowing and the CBN was availing those loans, the Senate should have done oversight and said, what's going on here? The former CBN governor, Sanusi, raised this, and no one took notice of it. Why do you keep availing billions and trillions to the federal government to spend without any recourse to accountability? That's when they should have done their job. But when they waited to the wee hours when Buhari was leaving, they were forced to pass that bill because they were waiting to the very end. And they tried to clean up the books by passing that bill that said we're going to convert Ways and Means to a bond. So they dropped the ball, and they tried to clean up their mess by saying we're going to convert this to a bond and all that, and it's now on our backs and our kids' backs to pay back. So they should have done oversight way earlier and not just to pass a bill and say we're done. Yeah.
All right. Well, we all know that the CBN and probably the presidency definitely clearly ignored that particular section of the CBN Act. But beyond the stipulated guidelines in the Act, are there corresponding punitive measures for, intentionally deviating from what has been stated in the Act?
I mean, overall, if it's an act and you break an act, that's already criminal, like it's a law passed by Parliament. If you go against it, you're already breaking a law, I believe. But crucially, the law says it's a temporary overdraft, and that if you don't pay back, you don't get new loans. Clear language. But this was broken. So clearly, if you go against any law passed, it could be, if you go against the laws of NAS, they would prosecute you, right? So these are the questions. How did this happen? Why did the Senate, the Ministry of Finance, the DMO, the House of Reps, why did everyone keep quiet? And almost 23 trillion was printed and given out to the federal government to spend without accountability. This is the point. So to answer your question directly, if you break the law of Parliament, there are consequences. The law of the CBN Act says we will not give new loans, but that was also broken. So then what next? That's really what should happen. Call people to account. And if we have to go to spend time with the, in the clinker, maybe that should happen. So to set the precedence.
But there is a provision that allows for things like this to happen, especially when there is an emergency or some issues of some sort. And we also know that the CBN had tried to defend this. That's the erstwhile administration, saying that it couldn't fold its hand and watch while the nation needed some saving. Would you say Nigeria was actually in a dire situation during the period this money was being minted and, passed on to the federal government?
Not really. They were borrowing internally and externally. They did Euro bonds. They borrowed from bonds. Federal government bonds were issued. Euro bonds were issued. So they got extensive borrowing. Extensive. They took money from the excess crude account. They took money from the sovereign wealth fund. Monies were taken and spent. This was in addition. And again, it was a choice to do this because they were spending money on fuel subsidies. They were spending money to defend the naira. So this was a choice, a management decision to take to borrow far in excess of allowable limits from the Central Bank of Nigeria and spend. That's the point. So there was no emergency. There was an emergency. They would have come and told Nigerians there was an emergency. For instance, they took $1 billion to buy jets to fight terrorism. That was an emergency. They came and took money from the sovereign wealth fund. They had no guidance that this was happening. Even not for Mr. Sanusi, the past CBN governor, we would not have known this was happening. This was kept quiet, and monies were printed, trillions were printed. Again, the figure is 50 billion United States dollars if you convert that naira to dollars that was printed out. So you can't say you had an emergency and you spent 50 billion United States dollars if you convert it to dollars. It's a bit too much and a bit too long term to be tagged an emergency.
Well, can we look at some of the development plans or some of the development projects that were carried out? First, you want to look at the significance of probably investigating the 10 trillion naira expended on the anchor borrower scheme and, what link does that have with the $2.4 billion forex transaction? Let's begin with the anchor borrower scheme.
We're calling billions and trillions like it's just thousands now, right? So the CBN gave that money to farmers to basically give them low interest loans to basically grow the agricultural sector because they had closed down the borders and they had banned certain food items from being accessing forex from the Central Bank of Nigeria. Good idea, but the report we now read is that almost 70% of those loans are not going to be paid back. The farmers looked at the loans as a grant, as their own short national cake, and did not want to pay it back. Also, the beneficiaries as we have also read, were political farmers and not real farmers. So that loan looks like it's gone bust, that the funds or the principal might not come back. Same with the 2.4 billion that you're talking about. CBN disbursed loans is not going to be paid back or very, very low repayment. Overall, the CBN took this development finance approach in the years of Buhari and spent a lot of money, trillions, to reflate the economy, to replace high interest rates that it has created with low interest rates it was printed to fund. And really now is a good time to ask, where did all those funds go to and who actually got those funds? It has to be a very, very wide net. This is the point I'm making. It has to be a very wide net to investigate all of this, both the printing, the development funds that were given out by the Central Bank of Nigeria, to get who got them, what was it used for, and then let's get answers. And if we get those funds back, it will help the economy today if we got them back. So I'm all in support of it.
Well, let's talk about the implication of this advance, on the Nigerian economy and how that can be salvaged.
When you print down that amount of money without a corresponding growth in exports or productivity, you lay the foundation for the inflation we see today. 23 trillion into an economy. What's our GDP size, right? What's the taxes we raise in the economy? That money is in circulation. It could be in dollars, it could be in naira, but it was printed as an overdraft given to the government. Government used to pay salaries or whatever. It's in circulation, but it has no corresponding productivity backing it up. So there's too much naira, classic definition. Too much naira chasing too few goods. That's the classic definition of inflation. So that's why it's part of the reason why we're in the mess that we're in today. Just too much money in circulation. So when you have too much naira, what do? You buy dollars because you want to hedge that naira that you have. And of course, the pressure on the dollar then goes up. Pressure on food goes up. So generally, you see a lack of naira being a store of value because it's just too much of it and just too few goods that we can buy from it. So inflation is the clear, apparent winner, in quotes, of what has happened in the past 8 years of the unbridled printing of naira across the board. CFA, that used to be in 4 figures, now seem to have more value than Naira that used to be in, say, minimal decimal figures. So, it doesn't look good. We're going to have to dig ourselves out of it through pain. Consumers are going to pay, taxpayers are going to pay, but the folks that actually printed these funds are nowhere to be found. But I guess now they're going to basically have to come in and answer.
Hopefully. Well, talking about inflation, it's something that even this administration is having to deal with. But a few days from now, the Cardoso-led MPC will have its first meeting. What are your predictions?
Well, they've been good. They're like hawks, right? And they are increasing interest rates basically to tap down the monetary side of the inflationary pressure. So inflation in Nigeria is driven by the monetary side and the food side, the supply side. They want to increase interest rates to tamper down the demand for cash and to make money expensive so that basically fights inflation. So I expect them to keep rates where they are or to even jack them up. That's basically what I expect from them. I don't think rates are going to come down anytime soon. If anything, it's going to go up or stay the way it is. They want to aggressively fight inflation, and that's basically what they're going to continue to do.
Well, if rates are jacked up, like you just said, how then do we, encourage, or how do we strike a balance to encourage production?
That is true. I mean, economics give you choices, not solutions. So you want to fight inflation, you've got to take those rates up because you want to make the money expensive, then credit becomes harder to get. So of course, then it reduces monetary supply and velocity in the economy. That's one way to do it. But when you do it, it then kills off the SMEs because you then can't borrow funds or get credit cheaper to employ and to invest. That's just the problem. You've got to choose one. Do you want low inflation, right? Or do you want growth? That's essentially where we are. The CBN does not have a full employment mandate, which means...
Carlo, let me come in here. Isn't there a way to strike a balance? I mean, in 30 seconds.
Not really. If you want to fight inflation, you raise rates. If you raise rates, SMEs don't get cheap funds. There's no other way to do it. If you keep rates low, you're helping inflation to flow through the economy faster.
All right. Thank you so much, Carlo, a certified financial educator, for joining me on the show today.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me.